Survivor of spiritual abuse or any type of abuse, I'm sure that from time to time you probably wonder, how do you properly construe disagreement? And one thing that's really important for you to learn as an abuse survivor is how abusive people frame disagreement. And that's really important to understand and in your recovery journey from abuse. Let me introduce myself for those who are new to this channel. My name is Dr. Felicia. I'm a licensed psychologist. And on this channel, I focus primarily on spiritual abuse, how to identify it, defend yourself from it, and recover from it. But I also want you guys to remember that the rules about spiritual abuse also apply across like different types of abuse settings. And so, something that's really important to remember is that when you are in a situation where you're disagreeing with someone, you have to remember how abusive people frame disagreement. Why is this so important? A lot of people can get lost in the weeds of the disagreement, and by doing so, you actually play into the abuser's trap. And so I'm going to talk to you specifically about a major lie that abusive people tell you about disagreement. And that is that disagreement is disrespect. Disagreement is rebellion, right? I'm sure that many of you have watched these different videos on either videos or testimonies of people who have been in abusive situations. And one thing that you will often find in those situations is that anytime the person who is being abused asserts themselves in any way, it's automatically construed as disagreement. Now, you might be thinking, well, okay, like whatever, why is that? Or not disagreement, sorry. Anybody, the person who stands up for themselves, they're automatically labeled as disrespectful. It's very important that you understand this pattern. You might ask, well, what's the big deal? Who cares if it is looked at as disrespect? Well, if you think about the way abusive people and abusive environments work, they work on keeping people what's the word I'm looking for? Keeping people controlled through fear. And one of the things that they like to throw around is the concept of disrespect. What is disrespect? In a spiritually abusive situation or any abusive environment, you're never allowed to disagree respectfully. I want you to think back to either any abusive situation you've been in, whether it is with an abusive partner, an abusive spouse, an abusive environment, like a spiritually abusive environment, an abusive childhood situation, or family of origin. And I want you to think about the last time or any time where you disagreed with the rules of the environment or the abusive person and you were not accused of being disrespectful. So I want you to think about that for a second and you're going to be thinking for a while because I'm sure that that situation does not exist. In these types of situations, it is impossible to disagree and disagree, with respect, disagree respectfully, right? And so the reason I'm saying this, I'm just checking my notes here. The reason I'm saying this is because when we think about like the types of things that people go through when they're being abused, their minds are literally putty in the hand of the abuser. And so the way that a lot of times people are like silenced in these environments is because they are told that any sort of disagreement with anybody is considered disrespect, right? And so if we think about like what disrespect means, I'm just looking at the dictionary here. It says lack of respect or courtesy, um, to show a lack of respect or insult, right? And so when we think about those things, when you disrespect someone, you act in an insulting way toward them, right? Now, when you think about this rationally, is it possible for one to be able to disagree with somebody and not disrespect them? Absolutely. If we think about like political discourse, history, even think about your own relationships. Think about some of the people that you're the closest to. or people that you respect, you probably have disagreed with them at some point or another, right? But the thing that sets apart healthy people is they're able to see that disagreement as simply that disagreement, right? There are some people that they will just see things, from very different perspectives, but they do so with allowance for that. And so if you think about it, the abuser, when they say that you are being disrespectful by disagreeing, they are actually disrespecting you because what they're saying is that basically agree with me or be wrong. And that is control. That is the spirit of control and manipulation. And especially in spiritually abusive environments, it's very dangerous because what that in essence is saying is that there's no room for free thought. The very fact that you are disagreeing with somebody means that you are a bad person and you're being disrespectful, right? And so that's the first thing. So disagreement is disrespect. That's the first lie that abusers and abusive environments, abusive people tell you. The second lie about disagreement is that disagreement is judgment. I remember when I was in a situation, a spiritually abusive environment, feels like eons ago, but I remember that there was a person in question who was engaging in very harmful behavior. And I remember being like in a meeting when this was being discussed, and somebody was like, this is what this person did, right? Imagine that somebody like broke into somebody's house and you're like, hey, um, you know, I don't know, I'm gonna think of like a name, Jill, right? Jill, Jack and Jill. So we'll say Jill Doe broke into somebody's house this weekend. And I'm concerned because people should not be breaking into people's houses like that. And the response that you get, let's say it was your house. Let's say that Jill broke into your house. You called the police. All this stuff is going on, and you're bringing this up in this abusive environment. You will be told that you are judging Jill because you said that Jill broke into your house. Do you see how crazy that is and how crazy making that is now? When you are outside of this, of course, you're going to be like, yeah, that's crazy. Who says and does that? But I want you to think back to a time where that did happen. When did you ever disagree with an abusive person or disagree in an abusive environment where number one, you were not called disrespectful, or number two, you were not called judgmental? I can't think of any. And here's another thing. You don't even have to be told that. You don't have to be told, hey, you're being disrespectful or hey, you're being judgmental. It might come out that way, but oftentimes what ends up happening is you'll get lectured about being disrespectful or judgmental toward authority or other people. You might get lectured about it, or you might even get threatened about it. Think about environments where people say, hey, we know what happens to people here who disrespect authority, right? Or we know what happens here to those who judge that, and they say all these things that are just meant to keep you in fear. And so I want you to think about that. And I want you to think about that the next time you disagree with somebody. Abusive people in abusive environments say and do these things because they want you to be silent. In one of my videos, I talk about how a lot of times abusive people will do whatever they can to make sure you are doing as much work for them. I told you the story about, it's a fiction story in a book about this woman who was being held hostage. She got out and then like locked herself back in the cage. She was being held in this cage. And so she did that because she knew that like um trying to escape would put her in danger because she was being monitored. And so this is what abusive people want you to do. They want you to lock yourself in the cage. And it gives them an advantage because if you're in a bad situation, they'd be like, why are you in there? Who told you to sit in there and lock the key or lock the door, whatever. So I say that to tell you that anytime that you put yourself at risk by disagreeing, but it doesn't mean that you shouldn't do it. I have resources in the description box for individuals who are like, being abused, definitely get that taken care of. But, somebody said this, his name is, I think his name is Patrick T, and he has a YouTube channel, and he talked about how in situations like this that there are no winners. And I want you to go into into this mindset that when you get in a disagreement with someone, remember there are no winners. When you disagree, you want to make sure that, of course, you're in control of yourself and how you say things and whatnot, but also remember that, look, there are no winners. And that's also really important because, sometimes when you are like, I've just worked with so many people and have seen this when people are disagreeing with something and having a disagreement like to protect themselves, and then they're being looked at as a bad person, that they're being disrespectful and that they're being judgmental. And they often will doubt themselves, feel like, gosh, maybe I should have said something. I don't want you to do that. We always know how these things play out. Those are the rules that abusive people and systems play by. So once you know that, you're going to go in with a very different strategy. And it's not to necessarily gain anything or gain any wins, but more about asserting your opinion and feeling respect for yourself at the end of the day. So I really hope that helps. I'd love to hear from you all in the comment section. What have you heard about disagreements? How are you conditioned to view disagreements, either in abusive relationships or spiritually abusive environments? I would just love to hear from you. And again, the resources in the comment section, the description box rather. Okay, I hope you have a wonderful day that is filled with joy. All right, bye-bye.